Welcome, everyone. I think we're about ready to get started. Before we get started, just a gentle reminder, if you haven't already, put your phone on worship mode so that you can be fully present for the wonderful sharing and music that's going to happen during the service. If you are finding right now that my voice is a little bit hard to hear, we do have some hearing assist devices out here in the foyer, and if you would like one, just raise your hand and John here will bring one to you. There's nothing worse than being in a wonderful gathering of people like this and not being able to hear what's being played and said. So we really want you to be able to hear everything that's going on. We've got a pretty good sound system, but sometimes people need just a little bit more, and we want to accommodate you. And the last thing I'll share is that a little bit later in the service, that we will be providing an opportunity for people to share. So if you want to, gather your thoughts as the service is unfolding, that way you can be prepared to share when the time comes. It doesn't catch you by surprise. So with that, I think we will get started. Jack? Poem, Greenbrook. I went through the woods and I didn't see any birds. Should I have heard them? I went through the leaves and didn't make any noise, but the leaves made noise. Jonathan Sisson, 1975. Joy and sorrow weave together a rich tapestry of our own individual lives as death gathers us into this blessed community of family and friends. Together today we gather to bid Jonathan Borden Sisson, whom we have known and loved, farewell, and to open our hearts to one another as we mourn Jonathan's death. We also gather to provide comfort to one another, and in doing so, we express life's greatest gift, love. For love believes all things, endures all things, hopes for all things, even when our deepest hopes and dreams are taken away. At this time, we are united in the wisdom and customs of people from all ages. And though we may be a small group of family and friends, we feel the pull of the ageless human community, connecting us to the universal paradox of understanding the miracle of life and the tragedy of death. It is in that spirit that we open our hearts to our own individual feelings and thoughts, as well as the many faith traditions that sustain us individually, into a harmony of support, love, and affirmation. Today, as we celebrate Jonathan's life and grieve his death, we know very well that death is a part of our lives and that life and death entwine around each other and are inseparable. We know that as we risk loving others, that eventually our love will include loss and grief. Knowing this doesn't make it any easier, for death is a loss for which we are never, ever fully prepared. And so it is with Jonathan Borden Sisson. So let us remember then that all life is sacred. It is sacred in its being born, it is sacred in its living, and it is sacred in its dying. This afternoon, we gather to honor the birth, the life, and the death of Jonathan Sisson, blessed child of the universe. I'd now like to invite Linda, Jonathan's wife, and Greg, Jonathan's son, to come forward to light our candle. In our Unitarian Universalist tradition, we begin sacred times such as this by lighting the chalice flame, which is a flaming chalice is a symbol of our faith, hope, love, and connection. Today, we light the flame in honor of Jonathan Sisson and the light that he brought to the world. Thank you. Welcome, dear family and friends. My name is Reverend Andrew Moeller, and I have the privilege of serving as minister here at the Unitarian Universalist Society of Bangor. On behalf of the Sisson family, I welcome you to this service of mourning and celebration. First, I want to express my deepest heartfelt condolences to Jonathan's family, specifically Linda, Jonathan's wife, their son Greg, and Linda's sister Judy, her husband Billy, Linda's brother Jim, and nephews, there are a lot of them, Mark, Evan, Kurt, Jesse, Daniel, and Daniel Forrester, and Mary Ann Forrester. I hope I got everyone. I also want to offer my sympathy to Jonathan's extended family and friends and acquaintances, those who cared for Jonathan near the end of his life. I feel very fortunate to have known Jonathan personally near the end of his life, and it is clear that he was an amazing person. Intelligent, clever, a lover of many forms of art, especially words and language. All that balanced by a strong wit and a deeply seated sense of mischief. My intention now is to share with you some general biographical information about Jonathan's life, which will only provide a very simple sketch of his life. Later, when it comes time for sharing, we'll open the floor for others to share, and in that way, we will co-create a beautiful painting of Jonathan's rich and wonderful life. Jonathan was born on March 20th, 1941 in Boston, Massachusetts, to Stanley and Margaret Borden Sisson. He had a quintessential New England childhood. Growing up in Cambridge and Lexington, Massachusetts, he regularly rode his bike by Thoreau's beloved Walden Pond and walked by where the first shot of the American Revolution was fired. Although he was very smart, Jonathan enjoyed entertaining other students, maybe as much as his learning. In middle school, he put on magic shows with his pal Ron Cahill, and he also loved playing chess and helped create a chess club in his high school. In 1959, he graduated from Lexington High School and continued his studies at Harvard, graduating in 1963. And it was during that time that he met Linda, who became the love of his life. Soon after, his geography changed a little bit when he and Linda moved to Minneapolis, where Jonathan began his graduate studies. Partway through his doctoral studies, Jonathan took some time off and moved to New York City to explore the business of publishing. However, he decided that the PhD was a better option, and so he returned to Minnesota University bohemian lifestyle. In addition to his studies, he wrote many insightful reviews and many publications, including the Minnesota Daily, Artscape, and the Minneapolis Star and Tribune. He formed the Itun, Apple Occasional Poets Collective, which included several famous authors of the time, including Garrison Keillor. During this time, he also wrote a lot of poetry and published much of it in a book titled Dim Lake with many of his artistic friends and other artists. At the University of Minnesota, he became the editor of the university's literary magazine, The Ivory Tower. And as a grad student, he apparently really loved working with students and helping them improve their writing. He was kind and critical, Linda shared with me several times when we were talking about the service. I am told that even when he sat down to read a magazine, he often had a red pen handy to correct the mistakes that the editors had missed. On January 7th in 1969 was perhaps the happiest day in Jonathan's life because it was when Linda gave birth to their son, Gregory. Greg was a joy to Jonathan and Linda in those days, and Greg was a really great support to his father, especially in these last few months of his life here in Bangor. In the late 1990s, Jonathan and Linda moved to Boston for Linda's work. They chose to live in Dorchester, which was a very diverse and struggling community. Jonathan embraced the move and began teaching English to students at the Corner Settlement House, with students from many places around the world, many of them from Southeast Asia and the Cape Verdean Islands. He also taught them chess and mentored many of them, helping students get into colleges or to connect and develop skills to enter trades. Jonathan was a lover of nature and natural beauty throughout his life. I am told that his favorite job of all time when he was younger was when he worked for the Appalachian Mountain Club, supplying their Lakes of the Clouds hut with food and supplies that he carried down from the summit of Mount Washington. Some of his favorite places on earth included the White Mountains of New Hampshire, the Scottish Highlands, the Greek Islands, the North Shore of Lake Superior, and of course the coast of Maine, especially Eastport. Not only did he love these places, But with his skills as a poet, he was able to capture the space and the thought that went along with them and wove them into his wonderful poems. All the poetry that we are going to hear today are poems that he wrote. A beautiful life, well lived. A life of kindness, cleverness, and beauty. Critical but kind, full of humor that put others at ease and brought out the joyousness of life for many. I am told even in the Westgate care facility where he was for his last days, he had a reputation of finding humor in the challenges that he faced near the end. Jonathan was a wonderful man, husband, father, mentor, lover of kindness, beauty, poetry, and puppeteering. The world is a better place because he lived. We'll now have some music. Steele to come forward to offer a poem.
Hi. Well, I'm so honored that Linda has asked me to read 2 poems by Jonathan. And these 2 poems were inspired by Crawford Notch in the White Mountains. And as you've already heard, this is a region that Jonathan deeply loved. I'm going to read the one called Crawford Notch first. The pebbles in the pool as well may bloom at Arethusa Falls as Frankenstein. A drink out of the basin of the flume is said to work like undiluted wine and make rocks strive to put up its cold hands at Arethusa Falls, as Frankenstein taught water to comply with river glands, as if I were to freeze myself to death and make rocks strive to put up its cold hands and feed itself and know and catch its breath. It is better to sit there by the fire, as if I were to freeze myself to death on this plain cliff and sleep where rocks conspire, but not where they could tumble on our heads. It is better to sit there by the fire. For travelers foggy in pale laurel beds, the pebbles in the pool as well may bloom, but not where they could tumble on our heads, a drink out of the basin of the flume. Sancta. On Iona Isle, despite the bad seed of the kings buried there, the sacral aura rises from the rock of pagan Scotland. And in Crawford Notch, by the Saco's Tarn, the polyglot gut of nylon hikers can never disturb the secret thicket of the dog graveyard. The one wilderness in all New Hampshire where my dog has balked.
I'd like to invite Greg to come forward and Linda to come forward to offer their words.
Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to all our friends and family joining us on Zoom for this celebration of my dad's life. And it is a celebration because my dad lived a great life. My dad went to the best schools. He had his dream job on Mount Washington for one summer. He traveled the world, and he was incredibly lucky to meet an amazing woman, my mom. And of course, he had an incredible son. My dad taught people English, he taught writing, he edited and helped other writers. And through it all, most importantly, he wrote his own poetry and fiction. My father was a great dad. He read to me as a child incredible stories and literature. He taught me how to play chess. He taught me about nature and trees and birds. He introduced me to great art, great literature, history, and the uniqueness of the English language. I'm very glad I inherited my father's sense of humor because he was hilarious. I think that's the thing that surprised him surprised people the most about him, was his sense of humor. He seemed like such a serious English professor, but then he would come up with hilarious, quick one-liners that would have people cracking up. I think the best way to explain my relationship with my father is to talk about our shared love of movies. When I was a kid, my dad took me to see Buster Keaton movies at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, in the same theater where he did many poetry readings. They had a live piano accompaniment for the silent movies, and it introduced me to just a whole new world of imagination and magic. We also went to see Marx Brothers movies at the University of Minnesota at the self-proclaimed Marxist Society. And then later, my mom and dad would take me to double features at the Uptown Theater in Minneapolis, and I saw some of the most amazing movies there. From comedies to cult classics to masterpieces to film noir and everything in between. I got a better cinematic education there than I ever did at any film class in college. One of my favorite memories of my father is in the summer of 1987 when we drove to Madison for my freshman orientation for college. And the year before, the great movie Back to School had come out with Rodney Dangerfield. And my dad and I both loved that movie. And in that movie, at one point, Rodney Dangerfield has to recite "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night" by Dylan Thomas. It was one of my father's favorite poets. And when Rodney got done, my dad said, he got it right. And that's the only time I've ever heard him say that about a poem in a movie. He always caught some little mistake. So as we drove down and got to drive around the campus where they filmed that movie in Madison, it was a great experience, a memory that I'll always cherish. My dad loved movies with trains in them, so whenever I see a movie with a train, I always think of him. And finally, the movie that most represented our relationship is The Big Lebowski. We both absolutely loved that movie, and I think my dad had met many dudes in the 60s and 70s, so he found it particularly funny. He especially liked Jeff Bridges' line, "The dude abides." We watched that movie so many times together, and we laughed more every time we saw it. So I want to thank my dad for being a great father and a great person, and the dad abides. Thank you.
Like Greg, I'm so grateful to all of you who are here today to help us celebrate Jonathan's life. Recently, our friend Maren brought me a card with a quote from Franz Kafka. "You see the sun slowly setting, and yet you are shocked when it suddenly becomes dark." Jonathan's death after a decade of decline from Alzheimer's came as no surprise, but it was still a shock. All the messages of condolence were such a balm to me. And as I read those many cards, the same phrases were used to describe him: gentle, sweet, calm, kind, funny. Even those who only knew Jonathan after he had Alzheimer's wrote the same. Our Tai Chi teacher, Dorothy, wrote, "He may have been losing his memory, but he never lost the essence of who he was. I appreciated his sweet, gentle presence and good sense of humor." Barb Wing from My Friend's Place remarked, "He always had a twinkle in his eye." Lisa Jordan and Skippy Valentine shared, "He was a bright shining star here at My Friend's Place." The night he died, one of the staff at Westgate came up to me and said, "We really loved him. He was sweet and funny." It's a great combination. It's sort of like lemon meringue, that personality. One card that I got was especially touching, from Edward French in Eastport. He wrote, "Jonathan will be missed by many. He was much loved and admired for his wisdom and insights, his humor, stories, and poetry, and his sincere and gentle kindness. I also much appreciated his poetry with the well-crafted use of rhyme, meter, and imagery to bring into focus subtle observations and insights. He was a lovely person, unassuming, wise, and compassionate." These past weeks, I've spent looking back over our 6 decades together, recalling the many good times we shared, looking at photographs, and especially reading his poetry. I'm so grateful that I had such a loyal, interesting, entertaining, and appreciative life partner. Thank you, Jonathan, for sharing the journey with me over the past 62 years. Thank you for encouraging me to grow and to explore and to pursue my own passions. Thank you for keeping things interesting, not always easy, but interesting, with your surprising wit and astute observations. And thank you for being kind and considerate. Thank you for leaving the porch light on. Thank you most of all for sharing with me the joy of parenthood and the beautiful person we created together. I will miss you always, for as King Solomon knew, love is stronger than death.
A poem by Jonathan Sisson, Glamour of Eagle Lake. The cleanest air on planet Earth is here, along the gravel road round Eagle Lake. The lack of haze or misted atmosphere makes artists' rendering look naively fake, though faithful to the rock-bound coast of Maine, where mesmerizing surf forever rolls and mutters a recessive rote refrain while thrashing steadily on granite shoals. But here, fresh water, almost motionless, is basking like a basilisk of yore on this fall afternoon grown zephyrus, alluring us to dream forevermore in meditation, like a Taoist monk enwrapped in ecstasy or merely drunk.
Okay, we're on. So now we're going to have a couple people read words from family members who were not able to attend the service today, but still had some wonderful stories and things that they wanted to share about Jonathan. So we'll start with John, and then we'll have Bill and Eleanor Steele come up, and I'll offer the last one.
A remembrance from Jonathan's brother-in-law, Jim Gurley from Winona, Minnesota. My dear brother-in-law, Jonathan, was a very positive and loving influence in my life growing up. His sharp wit, intelligence, gentle and kind disposition, wonderful sense of humor, and love of words all helped shape the person I became as an adult. I always felt loved and respected by Jonathan from the day I met him when I was a boy. I looked up to him as a role model. He was like a big brother to me. My memories of times we spent together are precious ones indeed. When I was in grade school, he patiently showed me a few of his sleight of hand tricks from his youthful days as a magician, like cutting a deck of cards with one hand, or holding a card and making it suddenly disappear. He was very dexterous with his beautiful hands and long, slender fingers. When I was about 9 years old, he joined my family on a camping trip to northern Minnesota, and a highlight was the huge black bear that invaded our campsite late one night. We were all in the same big tent, and my strong memory is of Jonathan and Dad yelling and making noise and successfully scaring off the pair. Later, Jonathan, Linda, and I shared a car on the way home from that trip. And after we went through a tiny town by the name of Castle Danger, we had a blast improvising an entire old-time radio show drama all around the name of that town. I was honored that Jonathan agreed to serve as my best man at our wedding. He recited a beautiful poem he wrote just for our ceremony. Tears well up as I think now about Jonathan. He was quite a man. He became a beloved part of our family, and I am forever grateful to Linda for bringing him to Minnesota and into my life.
These memories of Jonathan are from his sister-in-law, Judy Weizenfeld of Floyd, Virginia. When I was a child, it was always extra special to get time with Jonathan, who was funny and kind. I was also in awe of his father, Stan, who could jump a fence when he was 57. When my son Daniel and I visited the Sissons in Boston, we went to the zoo and happened to visit just as the jazz drummer was playing outside the gorilla enclosure. QB, the gorilla, was mesmerized. After that trip, Jonathan sent me the following cryptic advice, which I love. Judy, may the spirit of the jazz dance stylings of QB, the gorilla, be with you in exuberance and courage all the days of your life. Signed, Jonathan, July 25, 1996. Jonathan and Linda were with us the week of April 16, 2007, when there was a terrible mass shooting at Virginia Tech near us. Jonathan had good advice for us then as well. I never knew how meticulous Jonathan was until I observed him cleaning the kitchen when I visited Eastport in 2011. Billy and I visited Bangor in 2015 and again in 2021. It was a pleasure to take walks, listen to Jonathan's stories, and listen to him read. The visits were too far apart and too brief. But what great memories. Jonathan will always be missed and his memory cherished.
Okay, thank you. I'm channeling Jonathan's brother-in-law, Billy Weizenfeld, also from Floyd, Virginia. So here goes. Billy, I'm you. I remember just sitting with Jonathan and listening to his wonderful stories filled with enlightening intellect and always a great sense of humor. I remember especially somehow talking about National Geographic and telling him a story about Supreme Court Justice Douglas in the 1960s about Mount Washington and the young men who worked there over the summer. Jonathan declared, "Hey, I was there. I just missed getting my picture in the article." He then produced the very National Geographic and told many fascinating stories about his experiences at Lakes of the Clouds. Now, once when Judy and I visited Jonathan and Linda, we went to Bar Harbor and hung out there for a few hours and had a wonderful lunch. And I remember Jonathan and I split an incredible piece of fresh blueberry pie. Big mistake. We initially shared it with respect, and each of us with a fork. But by about the middle of the pie, we were fighting for each delicious piece. Our forks finally locked together like a great sword fight. Lesson learned. Don't allow two guys with huge sweet tooths to share a piece of pie. I also remember a wonderful experience of hearing Linda play cello while Jonathan read one of his wonderful pieces of poetry. Quite special, that moment. And finally, an afternoon in Minnesota during the time we spent at Jim and Rosa's wedding, where Jonathan and I sat in their backyard drinking a six-pack of Leinenkugel beer, laughing and talking. Gosh, we had a great time.
And finally, I have these words from Janice Crabb from Winona with Minnesota. She says, "My head is full of those wonderful salad days we spent together, Linda, Jonathan, Tom, Lucy, Robin, and me, a cadre of brilliant young literati. At least we thought we were. Drinking and laughing and carrying on loudly at Caesar's, our favorite bar. We liked each other so much. I remember how fortunate I felt to be part of our circle. It was an important time in my life as I was coming into adulthood, and the memory of those times has come upon me many times. Young, careless, and impressed with ourselves, seeking each other out to make those days last." I'm now going to invite the Serenity Singers to provide us with a little kind of off the program musical selection.
I have an adversarial relationship with my phone, so I'm hoping that this will work. That's not it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I have to be able to say that these things never happen.
You shall cross a barren desert, but you shall not die of thirst. You shall wander far in safety, though you do not know the way. You shall speak your words in foreign lands, and all will understand. You shall see the face of God and live. Be not afraid. I go before you always. Come, follow me, and I will give you rest.
If you pass through raging waters in the sea, you shall not drown. If you walk amid the burning flames, you shall not be harmed. If you stand before the power of hell, and death is at your side, know that I am with you
It's on. So now we're going to provide an opportunity for those of you who are here who wish to share, a chance to share some of your memories and stories of Jonathan. And so what I'm going to suggest is that you raise your hand and I will bring the microphone to you. If you can say your name and the context, provide us a little context. That would be always, it's always kind of wonderful. And we want you to be able to express yourself fully, but also keep things succinct so that we can allow everybody to speak. So does anybody wish to share a Jonathan story or an experience or antidote? Well, people are working on building. Oh, we got a volunteer, a brave volunteer. Great, thank you.
I don't know how brave, but I'm from Eastport. My name is Margaret Higginson, and I've known the Sissons for a number of years. Jonathan and I we always were the kids that could play together because we were the same age. So I can remember when I would go to literary roundtable meetings at the Sisson house, and they had a dog named Houdini. And Houdini did not like anyone to leave. Houdini wanted the party to go on. And Houdini would just bark and bark and bark and bark because he wanted the party to go on. And I can envision Jonathan right now enjoying this and wanting the party to go on.
Anyone else? Well, people are thinking a little bit. I have one that I want to share. I remember, I think probably the first time that I really got to know Jonathan a little bit better was Linda and Jonathan had volunteered to do the story for all ages for our worship service here with was it Peregrine puppets? Peregrine puppets. And we had spent some time and rehearsed, and this was about the time that Jonathan was starting to feel the beginning stages of his Alzheimer's and whatnot. And so we practiced and practiced, and so Sunday came and we were doing the performance, and it got to a point where he was supposed to deliver a certain line or whatnot, and there was this twinkle in his eye, and for the life of me, I don't know whether he just felt inspired and decided to go off in a different direction on script. But the funny thing was, it was spot on. It actually enhanced the experience. It was beautiful, and he just really got into the character of what was the puppet that he was doing. You remember? The magician and the doctor. Yeah. But I always wondered whether that was intentional or whether that was something that he just went and rolled with. But he did it in such a gentle and kind way that it didn't miss a beat. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay. So you'll have opportunities to share later on over our little reception. Switch over. Wonderful. Great. Okay. So I'm going to ask you all now to join me in the spirit of meditation and prayer. Great universal spirit, interconnected web of which we're a part, you who are most sacred and holy, though we know you by many names. We gathered here today to hold up the life and the love of Jonathan Sisson, who has touched our lives in so many important and meaningful ways. As we do, Let us remember to continue to tell the stories to each other, remember the essence of his being, of that kindness, that compassion, that cleverness and humor that is so much needed in our lives today. Let us continue to keep his memory alive by sharing these stories with one another, by sitting and being with each other in those moments when we are choked up and sad and feel the wave of grief coming over us, because we know that supporting each other in this kind of way is really the best way to deal with that grief, to be with that grief, and know that that grief comes from a place of deep, centered love. Spirit, be with everyone here as we go through our morning, and may we continue to remember Jonathan and all the ways that he lives. Blessed be. Amen. I'd like to invite Bill Steele back up to offer a couple more poems.
I have two short and very tight and thought-provoking poems for you. The first is Grammar. A village by the sea, so many houses gone, shipyard and fishery, the people of the dawn-thron throngs of spectral souls are wandering through the port, past grass-grown holes, the rubble of a fort. And in a snowdrift street, as the mad north wind blows, a deer and a fox meet, communing nose to nose. The second poem is Delabry. The north wind long ago broke open all the locks and gutted the scarecrow and scattered the flocks. The lone coyote's tracks across the virgin snow run from the hackmatacks beyond the bungalow and through the broken rocks in padding, to and fro, snuffling for deer and fox. The heart beats yes and no.
So, my dear friends, it is done. We have bid a loving farewell to Jonathan Sisson, and now we must slowly return to our living. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. The cycle of life is never broken, and thus we choose life, nourished this afternoon by the love, the spirit of Jonathan Sisson, who has touched our lives in countless meaningful ways and ways that will continue to live on forever. And because the poet needs to have the last word, I will end as I begun. I went through the woods, and I didn't see any birds. Should I have heard them? I went through the leaves and didn't make any noise, but the leaves made noise. Jonathan, your life is made noise, a joyous noise in our hearts. And we will miss you. Blessed be, and amen. I invite you to remain seated for our closing music, and afterwards to join us out in the Dorothy Memorial Hall for one of Jonathan's favorite foods, ice cream. So please join us for that after our wonderful closing music.